he told my friend he was going to come there and drag me back by my hair, right? He was going to drag me back. And he had convinced all my friends that I had gone crazy. I'd ran off and joined a cult and I'd done all this stuff. And they were calling me, "You need to come home. What's wrong? What are you doing?" They were trying, oh, it's awful. Those kind of people are very good at making themselves look very sane, and you are the crazy one, right? But I went and stayed with this woman. She lived on a farm. She had had a whole lot of children, and her husband had died. And so now she has three kids left at home. And she was Mennonite, so they had no running water. They had no, it was very primitive. But we stayed with her, and it was respite. It was just this amazing experience of being with. We'd never experienced anything. My kids never had, but they loved it. It was a break. He was getting people to help finance his court fight against me, and where he was trying to get custody of the kids. He was trying to convince the courts that I was out of my mind and I was crazy and I was not a fit. I was unfit. So like they would call social services, him and his family would call social services on me on a weekly basis. And I'm telling you, it was the scariest time of my life. Scariest time, because I didn't know what was going to happen. You start believing that they're right. You start thinking that what they're saying about you, maybe I really am crazy.
I'm Donna Anderson, and this is True Love Fraud Stories. A beautiful young woman from Southern California with rich but absent parents and a desire to be kind is just the type of plump, juicy target that con artists salivate over. This is the story of such a woman. We'll call her Kathy. Back in the 1970s, Kathy was targeted at age 17 by a con man. He was also fairly young, but highly skilled at manipulation. We'll call him Rick. He preyed on her religious conviction, her love of children, and her sense of duty to get what he wanted, which was access to her family's money. Kathy's father was wealthy. She described her father as high D, meaning highly driven. He became a self-made millionaire by his early 30s.
In the 70s, to be a millionaire was a big deal. And so I didn't know anything about the struggle, of getting there. All I knew is the way it was from the time I was pretty young. He was doing really well. So, I had horses by the time I was 12, 13, and I had an awesome life. Other than the fact that he fell into the traps of drinking, and everything was about business, and it was too much too soon. And so he was having affairs, and he was doing what young rich men did in the 70s, right? Family was not a priority for those guys. But still, regardless of that, I had no idea what it was like to not have anything that we wanted.
Kathy lived with her parents, brother, and sister on a California ranch, where her father raised thoroughbred horses. They also had a gorgeous oceanfront home 10 miles away. As a teenager, Kathy spent lots of time on the beach.
Oh, I lived on the beach. I mean, every day was sitting on the beach, the summertime anyway, spring and summer when we weren't in school.
Kathy went to a new high school in Southern California, where all the teachers were in their 20s. Everyone knew everyone, and her English teacher also went to the beach. He introduced her to his roommate, Jason. Even though Jason was a little older than Kathy, they spent time together, going on jogs, doing fun things, and talking.
He became my friend, and it wasn't any kind of a physical thing, but he just, because he was a little older, he just thought, oh my goodness, this girl, this poor girl, he just thought she could really use a little bit of guidance. And he tried to be sort of a voice of reason and keep me from doing things that were not wise.
Kathy was young, bright, pretty, wealthy, and totally unaware that others might want to take advantage of her.
It was sort of an idyllic existence, really, but I was, probably the most naive person you could ever know. Because I was never, there was no education. In those days, fathers just didn't mentor their children. It just didn't happen. So, and my mom had mental problems. She was bipolar disorder. So if you know anything about that, it's a bit narcissistic and polar disorder. So, and she was gorgeous, over the top, beautiful. So life was all about her. I kind of had to find my own way, and didn't have any guidance at all. Just my own internal compass. I was a very spiritual person. Didn't know a whole lot, but I had that knowing and that internal compass that kind of guided me with right and wrong. So I always wanted to be the good girl. I always wanted to be, the one that was setting an example, the one, when I got to high school, I wanted to be the most popular. I wanted to be the most everything, because I'm a high D too. And but the reason I wanted to do it was because I wanted to show everyone that you could be the best, and you could be the brightest in everything, and you could still be nice, and you could still, share the love of God to people, even if you're on the top of the hill. You could still do that. And that was always my sort of my mantra, I guess. And I always accomplished what I set my mind to.
Faith was always part of her life, but as she graduated from high school and went to college, Kathy felt her own religious revival.
In the 70s, during the Jesus movement, I got caught up in all of that, which was awesome. But I started going to this church down in San Diego, taking all my messed up friends with me, and it was amazing. But guess who was there? Mr. Rick was there. He was there, and somehow he spied me, but he knew he couldn't get to me, so he worked through my friends, right? And through my sister. So he kind of he got to know my friends, he got to know my sister, because I was not interested at in the least. And so slowly he wormed his way into things like, I was having gatherings at my home, our beach house, right? And he would be there. But he had disguised himself. He had, used sun in his hair, made it blonde. He learned how to surf. He bought himself a surfboard. So he was able to make himself look like a Southern California guy. And plus, he knew how to turn on this religious stuff, right? And so, long story short, he started floating around, him and his friends. He played guitar, and slowly but surely, he made his way into my life. And, I still wasn't interested, but then he went to my mother, who has mental problems, and he said to her, we had this huge house, right? He said, my landlord, they're turning our apartment into condos. Me and my two friends have nowhere to live. Do you think that there's some way you would consider renting your downstairs room to us, and just temporarily until we find something, right? She never bothered to say to my sister and I, are you guys okay with this? I mean, these are grown men. I'm a 17-year-old. These guys are like 25, and she let them move in. Next thing I know, there's these three strange men living in our house. I can't stand them, but they're there. And he's there and he's following me. It's like I go on a date, he follows me. Yeah, he follows me. So him and my brother go to the movies and they're sitting behind me and my date throwing popcorn at us, right? Is this just ridiculous? And it was like just wearing me down, you know? And I had no skills. I had no one told me that there's such a thing as a stalker or a predator or a psychopath. No clue about these things, right? All I know is my dad's an alcoholic and he is gone. They've divorced. He's gone out of our life. And my mom is mentally unfit, right? Super rich, but mentally unfit to know how to handle anything. So here he is. He's there every single day, Donna. He is there. He's following me. He's sitting on the beach with me. I don't know how to get rid of him.
Kathy finally went away to college. It didn't help. Rick continued to pursue her, calling her dorm 10 to 15 times a day. Kathy didn't want to talk to him. She asked her dorm mates, who answered the phone, to say that she wasn't available. So Rick wrote her letters every day. Even though she was away, she couldn't get away from him. When it was time for spring break, Kathy didn't want to go home because Rick was still living in her house.
My mom doesn't know how to get rid of him. She was unable to deal with this psychopath, right? He's living in our house. I told her, I said, I'm going to go to Mazatlan on spring break because I don't want to come home. I don't want to see him. I just have no defenses, So he caught me. He somehow, when I was there, I mean, I was only there for a day, but he figured out how to get me, corner me. And he said, please, please, I just want to be with you for just an hour before you leave. I have something very important to tell you. And I broke down. I said, okay. And he also knew how to use this thing where make you feel sorry for him, right? It was my weakness too. I'm weak when it comes to people making me feel sorry for them, or maybe they just deserve people to feel sorry for them. I'm a sucker for that, right? So he takes me on this drive up to this place, and he starts telling me about how God had spoke to him and he had a vision.
Rick used Kathy's love of God and love of the Bible to trap her.
He tells me he had a vision. He saw Jesus. Jesus told him that I was supposed to be his wife, I'm a 17-year-old kid that I love God more than anything. I'm incredibly naive, incredibly vulnerable. And he tells me this, and I said, I don't really love you, And he says, oh, that doesn't figure into it. You don't have to love me. Love is a choice. It's not a feeling, and you'll grow to love me, And I'm like, oh my gosh, But I was alone. I had no parents. I had nobody in my life that was saying it's all going to be okay. No guardrails, no one to say, you're going to be all right. You know what? Maybe you shouldn't go that direction. Maybe you shouldn't. I don't think people realize how vulnerable a young girl is. I was extremely beautiful, extremely rich. I mean, my parents were. I don't think people realize how vulnerable. And since then, I've talked to some very dear friends of mine that are extremely wealthy that I grew up with. Same thing happened to them. Same thing, where a predator came along and convinced them, hey, I'm going to love you. I'm going to take care of you. You have nothing to worry about. And they fall for it. They fall for it because that's, as a woman, a young woman, that's really what we want. We just want to be loved. We just want to know that our future is secure and that someone is going to be there for us, and they're going to look out for our best interest and not their own. That's what we want. And that's what he promised. And so I thought, well, okay, I you know, maybe he's right.
If you're wondering if someone in your life is a narcissist, sociopath, or psychopath, and you need advice on escape and recovery, talk to Donna. Donna Anderson, author of LoveFraud.com and host of True Love Fraud Stories, offers personal consultations. Since she founded Love Fraud in 2005, Donna has collected more than 10,000 cases. So she's probably heard a story like yours before. You're certainly not alone. Donna is also a certified Reiki master. Reiki is a healing approach for stress reduction and relaxation. Donna combines this with her deep emotional release technique to help you let go of the pain of your experience. Book your session today at lovefraud.com/talk to Donna.
Kathy agreed to marry Rick, and he quickly sprung his trap.
I was under his spell. I was under his control. And he pretty much said, you need to quit college. We need to get married as soon as possible, and you need to quit college, which I did.
No one objected, not even Kathy's good friend, Jason. He saw Rick present himself as spiritual, so Jason thought Kathy had found her own kind of person. The wedding was in August, only 4 months after Rick told her his vision.
So he was in a really big hurry, obviously, because he felt like, he's got the prize and he doesn't want to lose it.
They married in a simple home ceremony when Kathy was 19. By the time she was 20, she had her first child. Then, every 18 to 24 months, she had another baby. Kathy always wanted a lot of children, but she also found that pregnancy and nursing babies relieved her severe premenstrual syndrome, PMS. Rick made her PMS worse.
I struggled with terrible PMS at that time, where not so much pain, but it affected me mentally. And once he realized that, he knew how to push me to the point where I would be, through the years where I would just almost go over the edge. It really is awful. And instead of being kind and trying to help me, it was prodding and making it worse. You really are crazy. There really is something wrong with you, you know. And I just had no way of fighting it. And the only way that I could fight it was I just had more babies. And it just, if as long as I was nursing a baby and pregnant, I didn't have PMS. I didn't have that pain, in my head. And he couldn't attack me.
Kathy eventually had 7 children, 5 girls and 2 boys.
And I loved being a mom. I loved doing that. It was a joy to me. It's just it was used against me, and everything was my fault always, continually.
While Kathy was occupied with the children, her husband went after her mother's money, which was probably his main objective all along.
Rick came along and talked her into giving him power of attorney over her livelihood, and it wasn't too many years that everything was gone. He just made short work of everything. She would call him and say, I need money, because really all she wanted was someone just to manage it. She had no idea. Just manage it, make sure I don't lose anything, and make sure that I get what I need, Well, he made short work of it, and he would tell her that no, you're not going to get anything this month, and if you say anything to your daughter, you will never see her again, and you'll never see your grandkids again. You know, he would threaten her, and I never knew this until many years later, whenever I did end up seeing her again. But after he lost everything, I mean, everything,
What did Rick do with her mother's money?
he invested in a gold mine, it was one. He invested in apartment buildings that he ended up not managing well and losing. He never would pay taxes, and so he got in trouble with the IRS. It just was a snowball of poor management, stocks, bad investments in stocks. You know, I was so busy trying to manage the home and the kids, I didn't know what he was doing, really.
Rick did not accept any responsibility for losing the money. He blamed Kathy's mother.
He told me it was her fault that it was gone. And see, I had all these kids. I was young, I was naive. If it was me now, I would have known I could step in and I could say, "Get the hell out of my life. What do you think you're doing? Who do you think you are?" Right? But I was just a kid. No understanding. And then the religious side is, this is my husband. I'm supposed to support him. I'm supposed to believe in him. And, it was just pure confusion.
Kathy, Rick, and the children had been living in her family's beach home, but Rick eventually lost that as well. Kathy's mother left and moved back to her childhood hometown in Oklahoma.
And all the money was gone. And when everything was depleted, and he literally couldn't support his family, you know, he made me get, we went on welfare because he couldn't support the family, right? And he was driving a cab at the same time because you could do that under the table, make money and not tell the government, at least at that time. And I just couldn't take it. And finally we quit, and then things got tough again, and he said to me, "You need to go down and apply for welfare again." And I said, "I am not going to go to jail for you to lie to the government about this. I'm not going to do it." And then he turned it around and said, "You don't even care about your kids. You don't care about your kids. You won't do this for your kids. So it was always stuff like that, using the side of me, the mother side of me. You're crazy like your mother. You have mental problems like your mother. I mean, I can't even tell you. It wasn't a physical abuse, but it was a constant mind squeeze for 18 years of destroying my self-esteem, destroying my ability to mother my children. If I wanted the kids to do chores around the house, it was always like, "What are you doing? That's your job. That's not their job." You know? I mean, I could go on and on and on about the mental breakdown, the mental abuse and mental tearing down.
But now the situation for the entire family was dire.
So there came a point I mean, I tried to do everything. At one point, I started a cleaning business. I just was desperate to try to make money to support us, and he just wasn't doing it. And I did that and for a little while, but that's ridiculous. 6 kids, seven, I'm pregnant with number 7, and it's like, what are you doing? Um, so finally, when it just got to the point where we didn't even know where the next rent payment was going to come from, right? My grandmother was in the hospital. She was going to die. And I wanted to see my mom. It had been 7 years. He convinced me that it was her fault. And you know how those kind of people separate you from people that you care about. And I was ashamed too, you know. Um, but I told him I really need to go. I want to go see my grandmother. You can't pay the rent. You need to figure out how to support the family. And I want to go see my mom. And so he agreed to it, but I think the reason he agreed to it was because there was nowhere else to turn. We were going to be on the street, no money to pay rent. So drove us to Oklahoma, left me with the car, and I went to see my mom, and she was very kind. She wasn't hateful, she wasn't unforgiving. She was just thankful to see her daughter again. And but once I got there, I realized that I realized the oppression I was under, and I felt like, you know what? I could die, you know? I really could. He could do something really nefarious. I realized it's like when you're away from something and you're out from under it, you know, you realize what could happen. And I just thought, I can't go back to that. I can't go back to that abuse.
Rick had told Kathy that she and the children could stay in Oklahoma for 1 week. Then he was coming to get them. They were only allowed to take 2 changes of clothes each. But Kathy stalled.
I told him I'm not ready to come home. I want to spend more time with my family, and besides, you need to figure out how to support us. Well, he just went ballistic, literally, went crazy. And then I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I I don't want to go back. I was scared. I don't want to go back. But then there's that other side of me where it's like divorce is wrong, and those kind of people, they know how to present a picture, their picture, to your friends, and they're very convincing. So he was able to convince my friends that I was really crazy, that I'd gone crazy, and that I'd kidnapped the kids, and that, he just wanted his family back, right? And not only that, he did things like he sent letters to every church in the town and told them I was crazy and that I ran off and stolen his kids and that I just needed to come home. And then he wrote letters to all these other churches. I mean, it's like being chased, like you're an animal and you're being cornered and chased. Does that make sense? I mean, I've never heard of anything like that. But he thought that he could corner me and threaten me back. But it freaked me out to the point where I realized this guy is really crazy. He's the crazy one, and this is dangerous. This is going to be very dangerous. And so there things happened where God intervened in my life, where some woman in northern Oklahoma, she heard about me, and she called me out of the blue, and she said, she was a Mennonite woman, and she called me and she said, I heard about what you're going through a friend. I just want you to know you are welcome to come here. If you need somewhere to go, you can come here.
When Kathy learned that Rick was coming to Oklahoma to get her, she and the children went to stay with the woman on her farm.
Because I was so scared he was going to come there, and like he did when I was in college, convince me to come back. And you're so vulnerable, and he could reason with me why, and I didn't want that to happen, right? So I went with the Mennonite woman when I knew he was coming, right? And he was coming there, and he did come there. But I wasn't there. I was 3 hours away, but he wasn't sure where I was. I had to be very shrewd, which wasn't my strong point. But I did it. I made sure I called him every day because I didn't want him to have any grounds, and I documented everything. I didn't want him to have grounds to say I had kidnapped the kids. It's hard to convince anyone I had kidnapped the kids when he brought me there, right? That was. So I came back to my mom's when he was gone, and he wasn't able to get me.
Still, Kathy struggled with doubt. Her mind was filled with conflicting thoughts. Maybe her husband was right, and she really was crazy.
Maybe I should just give in and go back. Maybe I should, maybe not go back to him, but, live close by. I mean, it's like all these thoughts, it's so hard to separate. Your self-esteem is so destroyed that you can't separate what the truth is, who you really are. And but I kept fighting and I kept praying and miracles kept happening. So it was like a breadcrumbs. I just had to keep going because he wasn't sending any child support. And it was, if he did, he would do things like the check would have two different amounts on it, so I wouldn't be able to cash the check. Trickery, constant trickery, Donna.
Kathy was 35 years old, and the kids ranged in age from 2 to 15. She and the children stayed with her mother for a couple of months, but they needed their own place to live. Kathy finally found a place, but it certainly wasn't like the beach house.
If you know anything about the Midwest, in the old days, they used to have a gas station, a store, and then a house behind the store, right? So this house had been remodeled. It was an old gas station, had the store part in the front, the house in the back, and that's what we rented. And we made and but I I was free, it was my own place. And although it wasn't the best, but I didn't have the mental torture. And so I could be free to love my kids, be with my kids, and not have someone hovering, trying to constantly divide and separate and turn them against me. I didn't have that. We had some measure of peace.
Kathy put her children in school in Oklahoma, but she realized that she needed to protect her children legally so their father couldn't come and take them out of school.
And so I started going to every attorney I could in town. And you understand, I have no money. I have nothing. My mom is not has doesn't have money. It was scary, and it was just praying and going, and no attorney would help me. Finally, I went to this one attorney who hit it, it was I can't stress enough, and I don't know if anyone's going to believe me, but it was just a miracle. I go to this attorney and he says, this is a town my parents grew up in. Everyone knows everyone. It's very small, very poor, very tiny town, right? 4,000 people maybe. He says, when your mom was a little girl, my parents sponsored her for church camp because she was just this poor little girl. Her mother was a widow. They were so poor. And he says, and my mom always talked about that. He goes, you know what? I want to help you. He says, I'm going to help you because for my mother, I think it's the right thing to do. So he says, you can just pay me when you're able, right? Who does that?
The attorney drafted a legal separation for Kathy. Then the local churches stepped up to help.
The churches in town had brought me furniture. You have to understand, we had no clothes. The only thing I had was a car, but it was my car. And that's all we had. And so churches were just wonderful. They brought us furniture. They brought us, it was amazing. And so I was able to make the house look nice. And but here I am constantly being bombarded by social services, by he got people to help him, his family with court stuff. So, lies and, sending me money, but not really sending me money, right? Saying that he sent me the money, but he didn't because I couldn't cash the check. So so trickery, just constant trickery.
Rick then sued Kathy for divorce.
He ended up suing me for divorce because I guess maybe he thought that it would scare me to death and that would maybe scare me back. I don't know. But he sued me for divorce because I had no intentions. I would not have done that. I just wanted to get a break, and see what is this guy really made of? Is he really a crazy psychopath, or is he gonna turn out nice, A normal person, a normal man that really loves his wife is gonna say, I see you're having a hard time. I will come there. I will, let me give you all the time you need. I'm going to work and try to make a way to support my family, and I'm going to let you figure it out, right? No, 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 no. That's not what he does. He goes on the attack. It's the attack. So accusations, and when DHS or social services came to me, that's a whole nother amazing miracle because he had told them the kids are living in squalor, all these lies. And so I called social services and I said, I want you to send someone to my home so you can see for yourself, how we're living.
The agency did send a social worker to Kathy's home.
They sent her there. And my house, although we were poor, we had made it nice. It was very nice. It was very clean. And she was so angry at what they were doing to me. She said, you tell me what you want me to put in this report. I want to know what you want me to say because I am disgusted. I am angry about this. You're an incredible mother. You have incredible children, and your home is a home. And so I told her my story. She put it in the report, and he had a hard time using DHS after that.
Kathy later had to appear before a social services mediator in California about the custody of her children. Kathy described the woman as scary.
She kind of believed him, right? And I had to make a decision. Am I going to because he told her I was a religious nut, that I believed in the end of the world, and I mean all this stuff that he told the courts, which was really crazy because he actually believed that, but he was using it against me again. And I had to go in there and tell this woman who already thought I was crazy. She thought that I was like my mother. And I just prayed. I said, God, I'm not going to compromise my beliefs and who I am just to appease this woman and be able to keep my kids. You're going to have to defend me. And so I went in there and I told her my story and I said, yes, I am a religious person and I do plan on raising my kids that way. I just told my story and he didn't get the kids. She ruled in my favor.
Why? The California mediator read the social services report from Oklahoma. It helped her decide to let Kathy keep the children.
Do you see what I mean? It's like that woman came to my house, she heard my story, she wrote it down, and so the California court system said, no, we're not taking these kids. This guy's lying. They saw that he was lying, So that was amazing because that was a close call. Really, it was a very close call.
The divorce itself was easy because Kathy and Rick had no assets. Rick was ordered to pay $1,200 a month in child support, but he never did. So Kathy had to find a way to support herself and 7 children. Her old friend, Jason, had a suggestion.
Jason, just was like, oh my goodness, that watching this happen was like, what in the world? I mean, my situation was so bad that people would walk the other way, right? Because they were so afraid that I was going to ask them for help. It was a very impossible situation. And so he was a mortgage broker and a real estate broker in California. And he just kind of threw out there, maybe you could do real estate. Um, go, let's look into that. So I actually went to the mayor of this little town who went to high school with my dad, right? Knew my dad. My dad was a big deal because he was one that made it out of the little small town, and he made it big, and so he was kind of famous in a way. And so the mayor said to me, you should do real estate. He said, there's only one other guy in town that does it, and he needs a little competition, and maybe you should try that. I think that's a good idea.
At the time, Kathy had taken a 95-year-old woman with dementia into her home and earned $1,000 a month caring for her. The job allowed her to stay home with her children. So, while watching the old woman, Kathy studied real estate, following a program on cassette tapes.
I got my real estate license finally, and I got actually, I went ahead and got my loan originating license as well. And but I had been so abused for so many years. My confidence was very, very tiny, and I was always afraid of being abused again. And so I literally couldn't, when I got my license, I couldn't call anyone and say, "Can I show your house?" I was too afraid. I was just traumatized. And so my friend Jason would have to call from California and ask if I could show a house. Because I just couldn't do it. I had PTSD. But slowly but surely, I learned. I worked. I turned that front part of my house that was a store originally. I turned it into my office.
Kathy learned the mortgage business as well. She became familiar with Fannie Mae, VA, and FHA loans, which were previously unavailable in the small Oklahoma town.
I learned fast. I mean, it's amazing how quick you can learn whenever you've got the pressure of all these little kiddos, right? And so I learned the business, and I started advertising no down payment loans. And literally, people would come from everywhere to get qualified to fill out an application. And so it was truly amazing how that happened. And this person in the town, the only realtor in town, broker, he called me and he said, "I just want you to know I'm not going to work with you. Don't ever ask me to show one of my houses because I'm not going to allow you to. So I'm just letting you know I don't like you and I don't want to work with you." So there I was again. I no, I had to do it myself. I had to list a house, sell a house, and finance the house, you know, and I just started momentum started growing, people started hearing, they started coming. And so that was in 1998. We barely had internet then, Donna. We barely had cell phones then. Is that amazing? Barely had that.
Kathy was working a lot, which meant her children had to pitch in and manage their home.
I had to learn how to delegate with my kids. I had to learn how to, they had to learn how to do the laundry. They had to learn how to do the cooking because mom has to figure out how to support us. But it worked. We did it. And even while we're being chased by their dad, we learned how to do it. And so that was in 1998. And I worked really, really hard. And by 2001, another miracle. I went on a listing appointment for a house on 300 acres, beautiful home. And this whole time I'd been working, and I just, so this was 98, 99, 2000, 4 years later, right? I've been saving, saving, saving. And so I went on this appointment and I fell in love with this house. And Jason happened to have been visiting at that time. And he went on the appointment with me. And he said to the gentleman, he said, would you be interested in financing this home if we found the right person? The man said he owned it free and clear, and he said, sure, because I would do that. And so we went outside and we're talking, and I'm like, I want this house. I don't want to sell this house. And he's like, but this would be a nice commission for you. He said, no, no, no. I want out of that rat house, out of that gas station. I want to live in this house, you know? And so we went back in, and Jason says to this man, who that's a whole nother story of amazingness, miracle. He says to this man, I think I have a buyer for you. And the guy's going, what? What? You know? And he goes, she wants to buy your house. And so long story short, I bought this house. You know, he carried it. I was able to give him like 10% down. So, you know, I bought it for, I think, 350,000, you know, 400,000 maybe, which now it doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a lot then for me. You know, my payment was 900 a month. It was a lot, you know. But I did it, and this was like Shangri-La. It really was for us.
Now Kathy had to make a mortgage payment every month, so she put even more energy into her business. Her children needed to help.
I had to learn how to manage my family almost like a corporation, because I had to work. I had to, you know, it still was very, very hard to make a living there. You know, the average sales price was 30,000. So very hard. You had to do a lot of deals to make any significant money. And so I was in the trenches, but the kids, I know it sounds crazy, but they ended up homeschooling. I didn't do it. It was a self-teaching curriculum. They did amazingly well. They ended up um, um, learning music and becoming, they formed a musical group. They traveled and sang. They made two CDs, and you know, it was an amazing thing, because they took it very seriously, taking care of me and taking care of our home. It was ours. You know, nowadays kids tend to be entitled, and it's like you try to give them chores and they don't want to do it, but mine were not like that. They understood how hard it was to get what we got. And so their jobs were their jobs, and you know, so they took it very seriously, and they would keep you know, do all the yard work. They had a garden every year. They would go to the store. One of them, the one that was driving, would take everyone to, I'd give them money. I'd say, okay, you guys, you have to plan out the meals. You have to make sure you have enough money to pay, you know, for what you're gonna buy. And so they would do that. They'd plan it out, and they learned how to budget, and it was awesome. It was great. And we had a great life. They weren't interested in having internet. They weren't interested in, you know, they did their music. But then we always had this specter, you know. He tried to say I was abusing them because they didn't have internet. It's like, you know, it was a constant fight, you know. But we did it, and I did well, and now I'm a grandmother, so he still is there, but he doesn't have any power anymore, you know, not least over me.
For many years, Kathy's good friend, Jason, continued helping her, even though he was in California and she was in Oklahoma.
He knew how to do the business, you know, so he was helping me from afar, and coming to visit us. And finally in 2006, I said, you know, I'm still kind of a young woman. I'm not old, and I want to have a life, you know. I want to have, so it was either you either marry me, or I'm gonna find someone, you know. And I guess he decided he really just couldn't live without me. So, you know, and he, you know, we've known each other for so long. It's 45 years now. And so it's wonderful, you know, it's a wonderful life now.
Kathy and Jason moved to Arizona. where she now has a thriving real estate business. Kathy ranks #1 in the state with her brokerage and #6 in the country. She's thrilled that 2 of her children work with her. Kathy has good relationships with all her children and grandchildren. Everyone is doing well. After all she's been through, Kathy is happy.
One thing I do want to say is I believe that everything happens for a reason. And although what I did was foolish and just ridiculous, but I just think that if you have faith and I did not lose my faith through the process. If you have that, God has a way of moving your life around, and I believe he wants to create a story for other people. He wants to create something that's beautiful and overcoming so that other people have hope that they can get out of their situation, or maybe someone can avoid a situation. So I'm not bitter towards him at all, because my life is good now, and I'm actually thankful that I went through what I went through. I have all my kids, and I have 27 grandkids now, and I have an amazing business that I was able to build, and that's a whole nother story of overcoming the odds. Because I really went from riches to rags. And I can't say I'm not rich like that, like my parents were, but I do really well. And it's an amazing story, and it's an amazing thing. And so if you don't get stuck in the minutia, if you don't get stuck in what someone did to you and how could they do that to me, and this is the end of my life, if you don't get stuck in that, you can really turn it into something. It's like beauty out of ashes, right? It's amazing. It's an amazing thing. And his life hasn't gone well. He went on and did it to another woman and had more kids, and she was a little stronger than I was, but he went and did the same thing. So those tigers, they don't change their stripes. They're still going to be the same.
Today, Kathy's experience with her con artist ex-husband is firmly in the past.
I'm 62 now and living my best life, really. It's wonderful. And I don't think about all that anymore, because it's what happened is what shaped me into who I am. The wine gets better with age, right? And so does life. If you do it right, if you learn from your mistakes and you try not to repeat them.
I'm Donna Anderson, and this is True Love Fraud Stories. There are 2 ways to look at Kathy's story. On the one hand, it's a travesty. She was targeted at age 17 for both her youth and her faith. Her life was, in a way, derailed before it even started. On the other hand, Kathy's story demonstrates how travesty can be overcome through hard work and faith. She kept praying, and miracles kept happening. Kathy is now, as she said, living her best life. In the next episode of True Love Fraud Stories, I'll talk to Travis Vining, author of The Miracle in the Madness. Travis's father was a serial killer who wanted him to be an accomplice. Travis was able to escape the pain and bewilderment of the experience through faith, and it made all the difference in his life. Be sure to listen. What do you think you've learned?
Well, I've learned that people that you have to be careful who you trust. I'm a little more cautious about wanting to see people, the fruits of their life, not just what they say, right? And, there's shysters around every corner. I think there's more sociopath and psychopathic type people. There's more than we even know. I think there's so many of those folks, and you really just have to have your spider sense, where you're careful. I've run across other ones since then, and there's telltale signs, so you have to be careful, I think, and not trust so much. But then trust, does that make sense? You don't want to be jaded and negative, but you want to be wise, you know, I think. And then anything is, even in the depths, you can still get yourself out of it. There's women that, they just can't seem to get themselves out of it. And I understand that. I understand how it is. And then people don't understand how someone can just stay in a situation. But you can't understand unless you've been there. It's like a mental cage. It really is. It's like a mental cage. Um and so I would say to those kind of women that are in those situations, there is hope. And lean on your faith and trust that God can get you out of it. He really can. And you really have to trust and go forward in faith is what I think. And I do that with everything in my life now.
True Love Fraud Stories is produced by lovefraud.com. For more information about this story, other great stories, or if you'd like to share your story, visit podcasts.lovefraud.com. Engineering is by Terry Kelly. To learn how to recognize and recover from everyday sociopaths, visit lovefraud.com. You'll find articles, books, and webinars. You can also book an appointment with me, Donna Anderson, for advice about your personal experience with someone who may be a sociopath. I'm also a certified Reiki master, so I can help you to let go of the pain of your experience. Book your session today at lovefraud.com/talk to Donna.